want it up?
Yes.
Okay. There you go.
Yep.
Very
I just
good.
didn't want to cover it. Usually it sits on the urn.
Oh, I
But
see.
since that's beautiful, I don't want to cover that up. So
Yeah, my oldest son said he's going to take him out of the urn once a year and have a drink with him.
There you go.
Remember, I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go." And then Jacob woke up from his sleep and exclaimed, "Certainly the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." If you would, please join me and rise as we share in a hymn together on page 4 of your bulletin. You may be seated. Welcome to First Congregational Church this evening. We are people along the way, learning, growing, and acting in faith. And we come with many different thoughts, having done many different things today. We've come from many different places on this common journey of understanding and building a life around a common loss. And so we gather here to commend to God with thanksgiving the life of George White. We do this knowing that in both life and in death, that God remains faithful. And we do this knowing that we gather in faithfulness to one another. I do have a few housekeeping items. The restrooms are downstairs, and there's an elevator just past the stairs if that is convenient for you. And if you need to, during the service, if you need anything, ushers are in the back with name tags on. And there's also space in the back of the sanctuary for children to relax and play while they're still able to join the service with us. And if you need to just be up and moving around, there is sound broadcast throughout the building, so feel free to do so. If you would join me for our responsive reading. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters, and he restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Thou preparest the table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, and my cup overflows. At this time, a couple members of the family would like to share some words. I know that Kathy and Ronnie, but also some others. So when you are ready, please share with us.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming out today. It means a lot to see all these faces that I have grown up with and known, and that my father has also watched me grow up with and know and come to love. I wanted to talk about my father through my eyes and how I've learned to appreciate things in a different light that I didn't think that I thought of as a child. So prepared a little speech to read. The story of my father through my eyes is the story of a man torn to pieces slowly over time. He's been ripped up, stitched up, and left many times by doctors, in my opinion, to the point where our family called him Frankenstein. He has died enough to form, in my opinion, a friendship with death, coming back, losing a couple pieces of his puzzle every time. My father, when I was young, I believed my father died when he had his first stroke. The whole of my father died when he had his first stroke. And after that, as a young boy, I thought of him as just a man in my life. That is what I believed for years and years. Eventually, I drifted away from him, and I stopped thinking about him much as a child. I started talking to him out of a feeling I had to. My father was a man who talked about his blue blazer, going on pointless drives to nowhere in particular, just because we wanted to. Maybe listen to Dawkins, jam out to Metallica. He disciplined me when necessary, and he rewarded me with Yu-Gi-Oh cards and took me out to garage sales to pick up random pointless stuff that I held on for years. He would show me the wonders of outer space on his lap, looking at black holes on a computer, and the action and adventure of old flicks like Conan the Barbarian and Dune. The man my father became was lounging, staying quiet, and other adult curiosities. Many memories of my father after his stroke, I regret to say, haven't stuck. I didn't detest my father at all. I just didn't know what he had become. That was the case until I became a father. When Carl was born, it wasn't instant, but my father seemed to peer through the curtains of being a broken puzzle whenever Carl was around. Some young fathers who went through what I went through may have taken the road of detestment and may have started to look at my father and thinking, why wasn't he there when I wanted him? But I saw this as an opportunity to bring portions of him back, to reform a bond, and he seemed to want to try. But it takes time. Eventually, he reverted to being active, a little less and less. Then the lung issue started, which was the beginning of the end. Initially, I thought this would be just another near-death incident. I found out too late in my heart that this wasn't just a near-death, this was the last chapter. I started to reach out to him more and more, and I would try to bring Carl over as much as I could. I wanted to go on drives with him. I wanted to take him to Kenai and Soldotna with me. I wanted to just go on pointless drives, listening to Tool and Metallica and Dokken. I remember we had probably the last memory that I had with him that is probably going to stick around forever, and I'm never going to let Carl forget this, is the time that Carl had his first taste of alcohol, purely by accident. Carl was, my father was at a facility down the road from me, easy for me to walk to. And one night I decided to put Carl on a sled, cover myself up in clothing, and just walk down to him, just to chit-chat. Didn't bring the truck or nothing. I just walked down to him. And we did. We talked for a bit, and it was a good sort of talk where it was about nothing in particular. You just talked. It was about being there and forming a connection and a bond. And Carl saw one of those little hospital containers of apple juice sitting on a shelf, and he asked if he could have some, and I told him he could. And, I opened it up for him, he started drinking, and then I was talking to my dad and tapped on my shoulders like, ew, it's daddy beer. I'm like, no, it's apple juice, keep drinking. And he's like, okay, and he went back to drinking it. And then he came up to me again, he says, no, it's yucky, a daddy beer. So my dad reached out to Carl and asked him to give it to him, and my dad took a smell and then held it up to me, and I took a smell, and it smelled like it fermented, which it had, because I took a drink and it tasted like hard cider. This led up the chain of the nurse's command, because I got a hold of the nurses because I was concerned for Carl, and the nurse told me, like, oh no, it's fine. The patients here, they hide those containers and let them ferment so that they could get drunk at the facility. So, and keep in mind, this was close to 0-degree weather, so we're walking back home, and Carl's not able to walk. He's in the sled, just laying down, fighting sleeping. And it was a wonderful memory, and I'm glad my father was there to be with my son during his first taste of alcohol. But what I want everyone to take from this is the fact that everyone makes mistakes in life. And I feel that I had enough time to repair a bond that I lost with my father as a young teenager. And that I got to see through his eyes a little bit what it's like to be a father, what it's like to struggle to feel like you're not enough. And I wanted to, in some instance, in some way, make sure that he knew that he was enough. Because every time my son would run up to him, he'd smile. Both my son and my father would smile at each other. But he still passed away silently as he lived, which I don't think he would have minded at all. I wanted to talk about how he probably would have had an issue with even having this. He never liked being the center of attention. But his life ended in a silence of 3 parts. The most obvious part was hollow, an echoing quiet made by things that were lacking. If there had been movement, it would have carried its way down through the halls and out the door, meshed in the comings and goings of this world. If there had been family to surround him, it would have been filled with idle chit-chat of reminiscence and storytelling. But no, there were none of these. Down the hall, nurses did their normal tasks, unable to do much for the man, and knowing this, they seldom talked about him. Avoiding it as further discussion was of no use. In this, they added a small, sullen silence to the larger, hollow one. It made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. The third silence was not easy to detect. If you stood there at the foot of the bed for 10 minutes or more, you might be able to get the shape of it. It was in the stillness of the air. It was in the unmoving of the walls, and it was in the cold of the window. It was in the stillness of his body. The man was scarred, both in and out. His eyes were weary from pain and depression. His body was unable to sustain due to lack of use. This life was his, just as the third silence was now his, unmoving, stillness, and cold. It was now the silence that belonged to a man who had waited for this day to come. I do not believe my father feared death. Death and my father are old friends. I simply hope that his puzzle is not complete. Thank you.
I will either cry or do just fine. Either way, I wanted to honor my man, so please bear with me. George thought he didn't have any friends because he had been away from people for so long due to the anxiety brought on mostly by his strokes. And he was so wrong. Thank you for being here today to give homage to my George. The first stroke George had in August of 2008 had left me with a prognosis from his doctors that he probably would not live. So I started planning for a life with two small children who were barely old enough to understand what was going on. And then he woke up and came home in 2 weeks as if nothing had happened. But he was indeed a different man on the inside. Fast forward a whole year, and it was deja vu. Same story, different date, and he woke up again. It became apparent at that time that George clearly was not going to play by the rules. He didn't follow the rules. It was then that I learned that what most people didn't apply to him. Those first two strokes essentially took the man I had married and left me with a different person. A different person that I married and I loved and had gotten to know again. But he had to get to know me again. But I always knew him and he always knew me. Therefore, he knew he was safe, and he said that meant he didn't need to worry about anything because I had his back. Parts of him eventually returned, but the strokes took the man I married away in many ways. I always said he was the kind of guy who would give you the shirt off his back. You may have to wash it, but he would happily give it to you. That is the man who I choose to remember. Like anyone, George had issues. He came by them via childhood. He triumphed over them, and he was proud to tell you that at 12, he started his hustle, bringing money into the house to help his mom with bills, as long as she didn't ask where it came from. He and his brothers and sisters did the same. He also didn't mind telling you that it was better sometimes not to ask where it came from. He wasn't boastful about these things, but it was just who he was. He was also happy to tell anyone who would listen about having this truck or this car and what he did to it to trick it out. And embellishment be damned if it made the story sound better. That's just the way it was. One thing that is characteristic of stroke patients is that the strokes took his short-term memory, but he could go on and on happily telling you about a car that had this engine, this booster, those brakes, or whatever was noted in the most current car and driver magazine. This is the part where I learned the spousal art of the inserted strategically into any of the conversations that he probably thought I really understood after hearing how cars were built. It was a key part of the success of our 31-year marriage. George had grand ideas for what he wanted to do when he got old. But he struggled with the inability to physically be present for his kids the way he wanted to be after the strokes, because he missed that as a kid, and he didn't want that for them. This started when they were in 2nd and 5th grade. And they have to struggle to remember sometimes that he would sit down in the dirt and show them how to turn it into mud, because it was fun. Oh, the dreams we have. When I was pregnant with Ron, cell phones were new, and he used to call his analog flip phone his portable umbilical cord. I deny this, but apparently I was very needy when I was pregnant. So he would not have any issue driving across town to the one and only Cold Stone Creamery and getting me half a cup of their ice cream, because that's what I wanted and would make me happy. The George I married made sure that the sun rose and set on his kids, and they were good at getting into trouble, but many times it came with the condition, don't tell Mom. Even though I was in on whatever they went and did, and as soon as they came through the door, I heard, guess what we did that you're not supposed to know about? There was rarely a trip to the store that a new Hot Wheel car didn't come home with someone, and many a parent can understand how it feels to step on one of those cars at 2 o'clock in the morning. I choose to remember the George that I married because that was him at his best. He made a great choice when he chose me, and I was lucky enough that he knew that, and I made a good choice too. He never told me no to anything. It was always, whatever makes it easier for you, babe. When we built our house, his only request, sort of, not even really a requirement, was that it have a garage. Well, duh, we live in Alaska. I will always remember him as a loving, generous, caring, giving man who wasn't ashamed to cry at a good chick flick, because he always remembered the best in everyone else. He was George White, a man that blessed others along his life path with acts of simple kindness. He will be missed and will never be forgotten. Thank you.
Would anybody else like to share words? No, if you would. Oh, Kathy, are you?
I first met George when he was in the nursery. He loved being in the nursery on Sunday mornings. He loved those kids. And it wasn't long after that that he had his stroke, but that's such a wonderful memory I have of him, because he was so cheerful and he was always there. He wanted to be there every Sunday for those little kids in the nursery. So, and I also want to say, you should be very proud of your sons. That was a wonderful talk that you gave about your father, and I know you probably have words to Ronnie and Robbie. Yeah. Okay.
Please join. Was it? Oh, one more. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yes.
What I keep remembering about my brother-in-law. He and our mom had an interesting relationship, and I remember not long after Kathy and George got married, Mom turned 50. I think it was her 50th. And George had gotten like a black balloon and kind of a snarky turning 50 card. And Kathy was like, "You can't give her that. You can't. That's going to make her mad." And he came in, and they were talking and joking. He said, "No, I'm going to go get it." And he brought in the card. And it really was kind of one of those snarky ones. And Mom loved it. And that started a tradition that didn't end. Every year, he would go find some card like that for her birthday. And he would spend an hour looking for it, and she looked forward to them every year. And he always tried to look out for me, because I was single at the time, and he looked out for Mom. He made sure we both had little toolkits. I still have mine, and I kept Mom's, that came in handy more than once. And just, he was always thinking and trying to help. And I remember the Christmas after Mama sold the house and moved into the condo. Robbie had just been born. We put him under the Christmas tree on Mom's coffee table because he was so little as those boys ever were. And again, Kathy mentioned the Hot Wheels cars, the Matchbox cars, and there had been a bunch of those in a racetrack for Christmas, and George was putting it together on the floor at Mom's and getting down on the floor and playing with it with Ronnie. Again, Robbie was an infant. And I remember looking at Mom and saying, he's going to have everything for those boys that he didn't have, because it was so clear that was his intent. And he did adore those boys. And when they first got married, he was working in a florist shop, so he'd always bring home the throwaway roses for Mom and for Kathy and for me. And those were always, he had a good heart, and he had a thoughtful heart. And he will be missed.
You know, I'm kind of just coming up here and doing this impromptu out of nowhere. But I think that's best for me. Bringing up the Hot Wheels, oh, that brings back so many memories. Almost every single day after he was done at work at his job, he would take me, go to the store, and get me a Hot Wheel. And when I was old enough to remember it, he told me the first thing he did when he could was get me a Hot Wheel. He bought me a Hot Wheel when I was a little baby and just gave it to me. I couldn't even really play with it or anything like that, but I think that sparked something in me because I collected over 1,000 of them. And I still have them somewhere. I don't know where. I still have them. But even after he had the stroke, and he kind of, like Ronnie said, went away, I knew he was still my dad. And I'll always remember the positive side of him because he always made my day. I came home, he would always tell me a joke, say something, ask me how my day was. And that's the kind of man my dad was. He would always check up on you. He cared about me so much. And I miss him.
Hi, my name is Julie. I'm George's oldest daughter. I think I met him, Kathy, I was like 12, 11, 5? No. I was born in 82. So I believe I was 12 around then. And it was kind of odd because I never had that, you know. And then whenever I seen him, we would talk on the phone like it was like crazy. We would talk on the phone like, every day, every week. And the first time I met him was my grandmother's 70th birthday, I want to say. We drove out to Las Vegas. I lived in California. And that was the first time that I actually met Kathy and I met my dad. So like the memories that I have of him would be just, you know, over the phone and vacations and stuff. But I came out here when I was 15 or 16. And I remember like hating it. Oh man, because I'm in Alaska. You know, like I didn't like it because I'm from Southern California. But they took me fishing. We went halibut fishing and you know, like those embedded different memories for me. And I got to see who my dad was as far as, you know, a very, very caring person and everything, you know. And then the cool thing is that I had the same experiences as Ronnie and Robbie had about going to the store and getting a soda. And, you know, Kathy didn't know, don't tell her, she'll get mad. But I think that, you know, everything that my dad has gone through, I think has kind of prepared us as his children, you know, to be stronger and to make sure that we remember those good times, you know. And like Ronnie, you remember the times that he had with Carl, and you know, be able to, and that's a way for us to keep his memory alive, you know, with our kids. Like I have a 13-year-old daughter that he's never met. But little by little, you know, I kind of let her in. She's kind of very timid, but you know, all in all, that my dad, he was a good man. And when you look back, like when I look back, you know, I'm glad that I was at least able to meet him, even as a teenager, and my family has opened their arms. You know, my grandmother held Ronnie when he was a baby, and like Ronnie actually took his first steps to my birth mother when they were down visiting us, and like they loved my dad as well, even though, you know, many years had of them being separated. But you know, all in all, he was a good man, very caring and everything.
Now, if you would, rise with me as we share in the military honors. Gentlemen. You may be seated. A reading from the prophet Isaiah. On this mountain, the Lord of heavenly forces will prepare for all peoples a rich feast, a feast of choice wines, of select foods rich in flavor, of choice wines well refined. And he will swallow up on this mountain the veil that is veiling all peoples, the shroud enshrouding all nations. He will swallow up death forever. The Lord God will wipe tears from every face and will remove his people's disgrace from off the whole earth, for the Lord has spoken. And they will say on that day, "Look, this is our God, for whom we have waited, and he has saved us. This is the Lord for whom we have waited. Let us be glad and rejoice in his salvation." There is something, the stories that you all shared for George tonight were incredible. There is something to be said for what Isaiah said about a good feast. And eating together is one of the primary ways in which humans celebrate together. And it is at the center of the Christian faith in sacramental form. And I would guess that everyone here, that there is a meal that comes to mind if I were to ask you your favorite meal of all time. Maybe it's not a meal per se, but a specific food. I personally like all kinds of food. And when I think of the feast that Isaiah mentions, maybe it depends upon the situation or my mood on any given day as to what my favorite food is. What food brings the biggest memory? Sometimes it might be Chinese food at the Golden Dragon, where my mother and I would eat Chinese food every week when we went to the grocery store in a town that was 30 minutes away. Sitting in the corner booth with oolong tea. Or maybe it was my dad's family reunion potlucks. I don't know if it was the quality of the food exactly, or the sheer quantity of the food. Sometimes 100 up to 200 people. Or maybe it is the now twice a year at least sushi dinners that we eat because my children both have chosen sushi for their birthday meals each year for now 5 or 6 years. And come to think of it, maybe it's anything with mashed potatoes. Or a pickle and pimento loaf sandwich on soft white bread on a hot summer day with ruffled potato chips and orange jello with mandarin oranges. It tastes amazing, but it has to be really hot. It never tastes good in Alaska, Kathy. I think that's the problem. Right. I think Isaiah knew what he was doing when he left the details of the feast mostly vague, mentioning wine, kind of. You fill in the blanks. Yet most of us have not been in the situation being described. He is talking about a people living in a city that is under siege, who are worried and scared and have no place to go. And the timing of the writing would suggest that it was referring to when the Assyrian Empire was conquering cities in the region, and the experience of the people living in cities surrounded by these invading armies. There was no way out. And the food was surely running low, and the clear lacking among the people was glaring. And the prospect of a rich meal full of the best food when there is little to eat at all is a powerful image. And the truth is, in that moment when meal and memory are bound together in happier days of the past, what is the one meal that might set things right, at least for that day? What are the activities of community or personal rest that might remind us of the fullness of life found in God? As you are aware, and as his own family mentioned, George's physical struggles lasted for many years, and they shaped the life of his family in significant ways. In the almost 5 years that I have known them, Kathy and Ronnie and Robbie, they have persevered and supported George in incredible ways. It was physically straining, emotionally difficult. And I know, and as Ronnie mentioned, at times it was as if a theft had taken something from their family's life together. Yet at the same time, within the stories that you all shared this evening, it is within this particular relationship and these kinds of relationships that we find so much of what shapes who we are. Sometimes what feels like a struggle and what is a struggle that is too big to survive, it is a reminder of what it is that gives our life a direction of hopefulness. And sometimes it's the memory of a moment or a meal in the midst of a struggle that gives us a boost when we need it to keep moving and to keep going. And so Isaiah goes on to say that God will swallow the mountain that separates people, that God will wipe tears away and remove the disgrace that people have carried with them. And on that day, the people will say, "Look, this is our God, the God we have waited for." Rejoicing in gladness will tell the story of this God's work. But on that day when people would have been thinking about what would be the feast that I would remember, just like today, we remember the small things that held us through the days of trouble. It is moments like these that we can reach back and remember what sustained us when we were in the midst of our deepest grief. Perhaps it was a good meal together. Perhaps it was the delinquency of grandchildren. Perhaps it was little cars by the dozens and dozens. Perhaps it was halibut fishing. Perhaps it is Harley t-shirts. But speaking of feasts, maybe it was nothing more than a grilled cheese sandwich or a takeout pizza that gave some warmth of perseverance to a moment when things seemed like they could not get worse. Maybe it was the working on a vehicle with George. Or it might be the tools that George donated to the church, the same tools that I used to fix the shelf this last week. Regardless of the details of our best meal or moment with those we loved and who loved us, these memories are an indication of the care of God that surrounds us even now. And so as you all are doing today, and as George's family has demonstrated, pay attention to what feeds your soul and compels you to joy when you feel at your lowest. For such are the memories that point toward the God who is holding our loss and removing the veil that separates us from fullness of life, a life that is far beyond even death. Amen. If you would, join me as we sing a hymn. It's on page 5. may be seated. We gather together to witness to the presence of God with us. And we come in memory and in silence, open to the ways of Christ indwelling among us. God of quiet moments, of pleasant memories, and of sometimes painful silence. It is you that we rest upon. And often in the silence, when it seems most difficult to bear. And just as you showed Elijah when he was on the run, when the wind howls in the trees and through the mountains, when the earth shakes under the weight of the passing of time and life, when the fires rage in a fury and refuse to be quenched, you did not claim those forces of endless power, but remained through it, but of a stillness. And passed through the noise and the chatter that often surrounds us, revealing the life we have missed, the life we have been sometimes too busy to notice. Pass through the unsteady moments when the fury of grief and pain threaten to overtake us, but also pass through those quiet moments when our minds race with thoughts. And rest here with us for a moment. Remain with us for the next moment. For you are a spirit of quiet moments, both full of pleasant memories and painful silence, calling us to listen deeply, to love more faithfully, and to show grace more freely. If you would, please join me as we share in the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Into your hands, O God, we commend your servant George. He is a member of your family, a child of your redeeming love, and a present part of the body of Christ. Receive him from our care with loving kindness into the blessed rest of peace that never fails, the Spirit of life whose every breath brings forth life. We return to the earth, the body of your beloved George. And as you raise Christ from the grip of death, so you raise life from the dust of the earth and breathe life into us again, that we may live into the faithfulness of life found in you. Amen. As we depart, remembering the life of George White, may we remember the story of God spoken through George, the story of God that is speaking through us. Go in peace.